Students, now let us start with your text portion. The book that you must have brought from the market by now. The name of the book is Modern Indian Literature, Poems and Short Stories, and I hope you all have your books open before you. And now let us start. As you must have gone through the contents by now. Now there are almost 5 poets and 5 story writers that we have to study. So as you can make out from the title of the book itself, the literature that we will be studying is Indian literature, and many of the works are the translated ones. So there is this poet Jibananda Das, Siri Siri, G.M. Muktibodh, Naseem Ezekiel, Jayant Mahapatra, and also we have to study some short stories, a story by Premchand, R.K. Narayan, then Vikram Muhammad Bashir, and then Saadat Hasan Manto and Ambai. So these are the writers that we will be studying. So now let us start with your first poet. The name of the first poet is Jibananda Das. So please open your books on page number 1. No, it is page number 3. Jibananda Das, and he was a poet of Bengal, born in 1899 and he died in 1954. So let us have a look at the photograph of Jibananda Das. Jibananda Das was born on 17th February 1899 and he died in 1954. So something about the poet first, because in order to understand his poetry, you must have an idea about the poet also. So Jibananda Das was called the loneliest poet ever. Yeah. Because his poetry speaks of nostalgia. He's always remembering his birthplace. Anyhow, we'll come to that later. First of all, just open the introduction to the poet. It is on page number 3. Jibananda Das, born in 1899, died in 1954, and he is regarded by many as the most important poet in Bengali after Tagore. And he is also a modern poet. He may be called a participant in the modernist movement in Bengali poetry, which began in the 1930s. So now something about the poet, his biography. So Jibananda was born in Barishal, now in Bangladesh, and grew up in a lush green environment which houses its unique set of birds, beasts, and insects. Ponds and rivers were many, and even the sea was close by. So now something about his birthplace, Barishal. So Barishal was a place in Bengal where the poet was born, and it was a very beautiful place. As we have already read, it had a lush green environment, and it had, because of its greenery, it had many birds, beasts and insects. So I'll try to give you an idea about the landscape of Bengal through these pictures. As you can see, there is a lot of greenery and there are rivers also. So he was born in Barishal. So as I hinted at this earlier also, he is called the loneliest of poets. Okay? Why? Because the place where he was born, he had to leave that place. Now we have to understand why he had to leave that place. So in order to understand this, you will have to keep the partition of the country in your mind, because Barishal was given to Bangladesh. So naturally he could not, since he was an Indian, so he could not go back to his birthplace. And this thing haunts him in all his poetry. So I will be reading from the introduction. So you have to keep all these things in mind. So I'll read it again. The second paragraph. Jibananda was born in Barishal, now in Bangladesh, and grew up in a lush green environment which houses its unique set of birds, beasts and insects. So we have to keep in mind is that Barishal was a very beautiful place where there were many ponds, rivers, and even the sea was close by. So as you can see, so it was a beautiful place. But what happened? The poet, always something of a loner, apparently watched those natural phenomena with fascination. So naturally he was a poet who loved to be alone. So we may have an idea that he was a great lover of the landscape of his birthplace. So he must have watched the lush greenery of the place where he was born, and his father was a school teacher and his mother was a poet. So now what we have to keep in mind is that when the country was divided in 1947, then his birthplace it was given over to Bangladesh, and he could never go back to that place. So he stayed back in Calcutta now. So he continued to live and write there. So I am reading out from the last 3 lines of the page. So just have a look at that. So Jibananda stayed back in Calcutta. He continued to live and write there. So he now lived in Calcutta because he could not go back to his birthplace. He could not go back to that part of Bengal where he had been born, and this was a very sore point with him. He always remembered the place where he had spent his childhood. So he continued to live and write there, although he remained nostalgic for that part of Bengal to which he could not return. So he always, though he now lived in Calcutta, but he always remembered with fondness the place where he could not return. Why he could not return there? Because the place was now in Bangladesh. The country had been divided and his birthplace had gone now to be a part of a new country. The name of that country was Bangladesh. So ਇਹ ਵਾਲੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖਣੀ ਹੈ ਹੁਣ ਕਿ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਉਹਦੀ ਪੋਇਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਸੈਡਨੈਸ ਹੈ. Why? Because of his nostalgia for the place where he could never go. So you must have heard the stories of division, the stories of partition from your grandparents, how they remember with fondness the place where they were born. So many of your grandparents or your great grandparents must have they might have come from Pakistan, and you must have seen how well and how fondly they recall that place where they were born, but where the place that they had to leave because of the partition of the country. So you have to keep the same thing in mind while trying to understand the poetry of Jivananda Das. Okay, so the ਜਿਹੜੀ first poem ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਹੈਗਾ, he keeps on remembering that place, that beautiful place, that greenery. So I'll again show you pictures of this beautiful place. So ਇੰਨੀ ਗੱਲ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਦਿਮਾਗ 'ਚ ਰੱਖੋ. And now let us come back to the introduction. Again, page number 4. So he was meditative. Meditative means he liked to think in solitude. He avoided noisy crowds and literary gatherings. So किस तरह ਦਾ poet ਸੀਗਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਇਕੱਲਾਪਨ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਅੱਛਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਭੀੜ ਭਾੜ ਤੋਂ ਦੂਰ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ. ਲਿਟਰੇਰੀ ਗੈਦਰਿੰਗਸ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿ ਵੈਨ ਦ ਰਾਈਟਰਸ ਐਂਡ ਪੋਇਟਸ get together, they sit together to discuss their works or to discuss literature in general. So ਇਹ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਰਾਈਟਰ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਪੋਇਟ ਸੀਗਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਲਿਟਰੇਰੀ ਗੈਦਰਿੰਗਸ ਵੀ ਇੰਜੋਏ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ. ਤੇ ਸੋ ਹੁਣ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਦੇਖੋ, ਜਿਹੜਾ now he died on 22nd October 1954. ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੈਂ ਮਿਸ ਕਰ ਗਈ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਕਿ ਇਹਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ because he was he did not mix up much with people, so his poetry was not recognized. देखो मैं इत्थों ही पढ़ रही हूँ, page number 4 line number 3. So his poetry was not recognized by many people during his lifetime क्योंकि कल्ला कल्ला रहंदा सी. And a great deal of his poetry was anthologized and published posthumously. It means posthumously means after his death. Anthologize ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਵੀ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹਦੀ poetry ਨੂੰ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਐਂਥੋਲੋਜੀ ਦਾ ਰੂਪ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਇੱਕ ਬੁੱਕ ਦਾ ਰੂਪ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਪਰ ਕਦੋਂ? After his death. So he died on 22nd October 1954. Why? Because he had been hit by a tram car in Calcutta. So 8 ਦਿਨ ਮੌਤ ਨਾਲ ਲੜਨ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ he died. His novels and short stories published long after his death startled readers. So ਇਹਦੀ ਮੌਤ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਹੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਾ that what a great writer he was. So startle ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਵੀ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਚੌਂਕਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ readers ਨੂੰ. And now the next para देखो, इसी introduction ਦਾ. The poet had started publishing in the 20s. By the early 30s, he had transformed the traditional Bengali meter pyar into a hesitant, gentle rhythm with pauses. So ਇਹਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਦੀ poetry ਦਾ style ਸੀਗਾ, so the pyar